This morning I want to start with a question. And this is really a question that it's a simple question. I know it's a simple question. In fact, probably if I asked it in the kidnasium with all the children, or if Pastor Jennifer stood up and she asked the kids, they would be able to answer it. But my question is this: how big is God? How powerful is God? Or, let me put it this way, okay? How big is God to you? How powerful is God to you? Because here's the thing, in theology, this is called omnipotence, all-powerful. God is all-powerful. God's all big. I mean, He created everything. We know that. We know God is all-powerful and all big, and He's amazing, but sometimes I think it seems like we don't live like we know that answer. We may be able to say it, how big is God? God's huge, God's big, God's the big, He's all-powerful, but if God is so big to us, then why is there so much fear in our lives? Right? If we believe that God is all-powerful, then why do we have so much doubt in our lives? Why are we so afraid to step out in faith so many times? Or why are we so afraid to do His will and His work? If we can answer that question like that, how big is God? God is so big, so strong and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do, right? If you grew up in Sunday school, we could all sing that song, we can do the motions. But why are we so afraid? Why don't we share our faith more? Why are we afraid of offending someone or being mocked? I mean, is God big enough to help us overcome the shame that we would get? Have you ever thought about, is God powerful enough to help someone hear the gospel even though we can't say the right words? Is God that big? If God is all powerful and He is so big, then why don't we take bold steps for Him? Or maybe do what is right no matter what? I mean, is God big enough to provide for us because our faith is big? There's this amazing stories. I think of different people that have faith like that, or where God is so big. And there's a great restaurant. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called Chick-fil-A. I could eat there 7 times a day. There's even a song about it. It's great. Love Chick-fil-A, but I don't know if you know the story behind Chick-fil-A. Truett Cathy was the one who started Chick-fil-A a long, long time ago. And as he started Chick-fil-A, he was actually just a strong Christian. And when he started his chicken restaurant, he said, you know what? I believe that God is telling me not to open up on Sundays. And so when he started the restaurant, he said, we're going to be open 6 days a week, and we are going to close on Sundays to give everyone a chance to go to worship, because I want to worship God, and I want my employees to worship God, so I'm not going to open on Sundays. And he got ridiculed. All the restaurants around were like, are you crazy? There's no way you can make it if you don't open up on Sundays. They said it's one of the best times. It's one of the busiest times. You want to know why? Because people go to church, and when they get done, they're hungry. If you're not open on Sundays at 12:30, you're going to lose millions of dollars of business. And he said, no, I'm going to stay closed on Sunday because of my faith. They said, you'll never make it. Chick-fil-A is now one of the largest American fast food restaurants. And guess what? They're not open on Sundays. Because he said, God can provide when I obey Him. And God has provided. In fact, they actually have, I don't remember which NFL stadium, they have a Chick-fil-A in an NFL stadium. And I don't know if you know anything about the NFL, but they play on Sundays. Guess what Chick-fil-A is not open on? Sundays. Even in the NFL stadium where they would get millions of dollars, they still say we are not going to open for the football game. Because God told me. He had that kind of faith. If God is so big, can He provide for our business even when the world says you're going to fail? If God is powerful, all-powerful, is He powerful enough to provide us when we're called to give, even if we don't have enough to give? How big is God to you? Can God overcome the odds? Can God do the impossible in your life? I ask these questions because the scripture we're going to look at, the scripture we're looking at today, actually is a contrast between two people. There's two men of faith, both of them believe in God, both of them were following God. But there's two men of faith, and I want to look at how they react to an impossible situation and how it shows how big they believe God is and the difference it makes in our life and what we believe. So we're going to continue our series in Samuel. We're going to start in 1 Samuel chapter 13. 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 16 is where we're going to start. And I want to give you just the background of what is happening. And if you followed along the last couple weeks, if you've been here the last couple weeks, we're looking at Saul, how he became king, how God changed his heart. But then last week we looked at how when Saul finally became king and he started leading the Israelites, the first thing he did was mess up. The first thing he did is he decided the odds were against him. His army was running away. He was about to battle the Philistines. And he disobeyed God and he messed up. And instead of stepping up and saying, yes, I messed up, he started blaming everyone else. We looked at what we should do when we mess up, what we should do when we start off on the wrong foot. So this picks up right after that. They're still in the midst of this battle. There's still thousands of Philistines, and here's where we pick up. Verse 16. It says, Saul and his son Jonathan and the men with them were staying in Gibeah and Benjamin, while the Philistines camped at Michmash. Raiding parties went out from the Philistine camp in 3 detachments. One turned toward Ophrah in the vicinity of Shual, another toward Beth-horon, and the third toward the borderland overlooking the valley of Zeboim, facing the desert. Not a blacksmith could be found in the whole land of Israel, because the Philistines had said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. So all Israel went down to the Philistines to have their plowshares, mattocks, axes, sickles sharpened. The price was 2/3 of a shekel for sharpening a plowshare and mattock, and a 1/3 shekel for sharpening forks and axes for repointing goads. So on the day of the battle, not a soldier with Saul and Jonathan had a sword or a spear in his hand. Only Saul and Jonathan had them. Now, I read that because I wanted to give you a background of what this looks like, okay? A long time ago, the Philistines had this really smart plan because the Israelites, they didn't have a king. They were just kind of ruled by judges. They had this really smart plan. They said, you know what? Let's take their ability away to sharpen and make work with metal. So the only way they could get anything sharp and the only way they could work with metal was to go to the Philistines, their enemies. And the Philistines were like, you can have any kind of farm equipment, but we're not going to give you swords. So a long time they took their ability to make weapons so that if the Israelites ever attack, they could never win. In fact, sharpening their tools, I know those prices didn't matter to us, but sharpening their tools was really expensive. It was like gas prices right now, they were sky high. And there were only 2 men who had swords. David and King Saul, because they were royalty. So here's what the picture looks like. Saul's army has dwindled down to almost about 600 men. Everyone else ran away. Last week, everyone else ran away. They're hiding in caves. They're hiding wherever they can. They ran home. They said, no, we don't want anything to do with this battle against the Philistines. It's because the Philistines has 3,000 chariots it says that an army that was like the grains of sand. So like an army that they can't even count. They look out, there's so many, it's overwhelming, and all they have is just this 600 people without even weapons. Like the Israelites had no chance on this, okay? This was, they had no chance. Each soldier would have had to kill like 5 chariots, would have to take out 5 chariots apiece just to get rid of the chariots. I mean, that's impossible. That's beyond impossible. That's ridiculously impossible. That's why the army ran. I mean, if we were in that situation, if I was in that situation, and if I looked out and said, you know what, I have to take out 5 of those just to get to the army where they outnumber us, we can't even count that high, I'd be like, hey, look at that cave over there. That looks like a good cave to hide in. Because it's impossible. Only a fool would have stayed, or only someone that was really loyal and ready to die. To fight this battle was certain death. And then to add all that, they didn't even have weapons. They just had farm equipment. I mean, this is like straight out of a movie. You know, they got like pitchforks and they're running in the battle when the Philistines have shields and swords. It's ridiculous. This is like the biggest disadvantage battle ever. It'd be like if we were going to have a church football game, okay? And it was all of us adults versus the kids. We might have a chance. But what if it was all of us adults versus the preschoolers? Then we'd really have a chance, right? I mean, the odds are so big, if we could just get a few of us adults and, play football against preschoolers, it'd be easy. This is even more than that. I mean, this is like the NFL versus the middle schoolers, or maybe preschoolers. It's just, there's no chance. It's over before it starts. This is more than impossible. This is ridiculously impossible. I know I spent a lot of time on that, but I just want you to get your minds wrapped around how crazy this is. A lot of times we look at David and Goliath where Goliath was this big giant and David had this amazing faith to go up and fight Goliath. This makes David and Goliath look like nothing. So here's Saul, here's Jonathan, and the army. They're ready to die or run. I'm going to jump to Samuel 14:6. It's impossible. And then we find Jonathan. Jonathan said to his young armor bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised fellows." That's what, the Philistines. He's basically saying those people don't believe in God. "Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf." And if you have something to underline, or if you highlight in your Bible app, underline this: nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. I read that and I say, wow, that is faith. What faith? I mean, Jonathan saw it completely different. Everyone saw this impossible situation, and Jonathan looks at it in a different way, and he says, look, if God helps us, it doesn't matter what the numbers are. It doesn't matter what the weapons look like. If God is on our side, nothing matters on what's on the other side. Because God is so big, God is so great, God is so powerful that the chariots and that grain of sand army is nothing compared to my God. He said God is so big, He doesn't need 1,000 people on His army. He doesn't even need hundreds of people. He just needs one. God is so powerful, He just wants one person who has faith. And God can work the miracle. He can do the impossible. He can do the ridiculously impossible. So here's Jonathan in this situation, and he doesn't see the situation, it doesn't stop him. He looks at the situation and says, wow, this is a great opportunity for God to work a miracle. And so Jonathan, with his sword and with God, decides to take on that impossible situation. He says, if I have God, it doesn't matter what everything else. I can take on this impossible situation. So it continues. He said to his armor bearer, and if you know anything about the armor bearer, it's usually the ones that hold the shield and the sword in front of the guy that's fighting, or at least the sword, or the shield I meant. The armor bearer is as crazy as Jonathan. He says, "Do all that you have in mind," his armor bearer said. "Go ahead, I am with you, heart and soul." So Jonathan said, "Come then, we will cross over toward the men and let them see us. If they say to us, 'Wait there until we come to you,' we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands." Jonathan was smart. He has this faith. And he says, but first of all, let's make sure that this is God's will. He said, let's go. The armor bearer is like, okay, let's go, but let's make sure this is God's will first. Because if God's will is this, if He's fighting for us, we can't lose. God is going to win. So both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. "Look," said the Philistines, "the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they were hiding in." The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor bearer, "Come up to us and we will teach you a lesson." So that was their sign that it was God was with them. So Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Climb up after me, and the Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." And Jonathan climbed up, using his hands and feet with his armor bearer right behind him. I want to stop right there. I want to pause for just a second. If you're going into battle, if you're about to fight an entire army of Philistines, what do you want to be able to use? Your hands. Jonathan has so much faith in God. The Philistines have the high ground. In fact, there is such a high ground that it is a mountain that they have to climb up. He has so much faith in God that he says, "I don't even need my sword. I'm going to climb up with both hands. In fact, I don't even need my armor bearer in front of me, because he's supposed to be in front." Jonathan says, "I will lead the way. I will step out in faith. I will take that first step of faith and I will lead the way." And he climbs up with his hands and his feet going towards the Philistines. That is completely the wrong way to do it if you're in a battle. But Jonathan said, "It doesn't matter, because God is with me. Because my God is so big. He will deliver me." The armor bearer climbed up right behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer followed and killed behind him. How big is God? How powerful is God? God is so powerful that with one person of faith, He can do the impossible. He is so powerful that He can do the ridiculously impossible. Nothing can hinder the Lord. He can win a battle, whether there's thousands of warriors or only a few. The faith of Jonathan is amazing. I read that and I look at what Jonathan did and I say, wow, what kind of faith? That kind of faith that Jonathan had, that is the faith that I want. I want to be able to look at the impossible situations that face me in life and say, you know what? I don't care what that is. God is more powerful than that. And I know that is scary and I know that is hard and difficult, but I know my God is bigger than that. Jonathan had amazing faith. But what about the other person with the sword? Remember, there's two people with swords. Where's the other one? There were two swords in the camp, and the other one, chapter 14, verse 2, is where we find the other one. Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree in Migron. With him were about 600 men. Saul was hiding under a tree. The other man that had the sword was protected by the few people that were left that had farm equipment, and he was hiding under a tree. Continue in verse 15. This is the rest of the story. Jonathan and his armor bearer, God gives them victory. Then it says the panic struck the whole army of the Philistines, those in the camp and in the field and those in the outposts and the raiding parties, and the ground shook. God shook the ground, and it was a panic sent by God. Saul's lookouts in Gibeah and Benjamin saw that the army was melting away in all directions. I love that description right there. I mean, they were just so afraid, they just started leaving. Then Saul said to the men, he was so confused, and all of a sudden chaos begins to happen. The ground starts to shake. The Philistines start to run away. And then Saul said to the men who were with him, muster all the forces and see who has left us. When they did, it was Jonathan and his armor-bearer who were not there. They realized what is happening. So Saul said to Ahijah, bring the ark of God. At that time, it was with the Israelites. While Saul was talking to the priests, the tumult of the Philistine camp increased more and more. I mean, just picture this chaos, all this noise. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people are all of a sudden screaming and running in this. It is just pure chaos. I don't know if anybody's ever been Black Friday shopping. Okay? If you have, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, don't worry about it. It's not worth it. This is like Black Friday shopping on steroids, okay? This is just pure chaos going on. No one knows what's happening. Saul's wandering around. He's just calling everyone going, how is this happening? He's so confused. In fact, while Saul was talking to the priest, the Philistine camp, increased more and more. So Saul just said to the priest, withdraw your hand and let's just go. Then Saul and all his men assembled and went into the battle. They found the Philistines in total confusion, striking each other with their swords. If you continue to read, God continues to cause chaos. The Israelites win. They all come back, and the Lord rescued Israel that day. And it was God who did it. By the time Saul realized that God could deliver him, it was too late. By the time Saul realized what God can do, it was too late. He got there just in time to see God win, just in time to see the ridiculously impossible happen. We have two men. One hid because the situation he was in was impossible. The other one looked at the situation and said, you know what? God specializes in the impossible. And he stepped out in faith. My question this morning is, how big is God to you? How big is God to you? Because so many times I feel like we react more like Saul. When something impossible faces us, we bunker down, we rely on what little we have. We say, this is all I have, and this is what I'm going to use. So we bunker down. We have faith. But we look at the army in front of us, or we look at the giant in front of us, and we become afraid. And we can't overcome the odds on our own. Or sometimes we think, I can't overcome those odds, and you know what? I don't even know if God can overcome those odds. I know He's big. I know He's really big. But is He that big? And we can't overcome the odds with what we have, and so we don't even try. We just hunker down and say, this is what I have, and this is what I'm going to stick with. Maybe God says, I want you to start this new ministry. I want you to start doing this, or I want you to start doing this amazing thing. And you say, you know what, God, I can't. I am not ready for that. I'm too young for that. I'm not ready to step up and do that ministry. Or, you know what, I'm too old for that, God. I can't do that. And we just bunker down. Or maybe He's calling you to lead in school. If you're a student, maybe God's calling you to step out in faith and say, I want you to lead like a Bible study in school. Or I want you to do this where, people can see your faith. And you say, God, I can't do that. That's impossible. That's too big for me. If I try to lead my friends, if I try to tell my friends, what are they going to say? I can't do that. Maybe God's saying, I need you to step out in faith. And you say, it's just too much. I can't start that new job. I'm comfortable where I'm at. Or maybe it's a first-time commitment to Christ. Maybe God has been tugging on your heart for a long time. You've been on this faith journey where you've been discovering who God is, and you're realizing how amazing He is. And there's that step of faith where you say, God, Jesus, I'm going to finally take that step. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to give my life to you. And He keeps working on you. You say, but God, if I take that step, if I finally give my life to you, what is it going to look like? I don't know if I can do that. And God calls us to have the faith of Jonathan, where it says it doesn't matter how big the problem is in front of me, I can take that step because my God is bigger. I can share my faith to that person because my God is bigger than they are. I can do what is right no matter what, even if it's going to hurt me, even if it's going to make me look like a fool, even if it's going to make me get fired. It's okay because God is stronger. God will take care of me. I can give more to the hungry or to the missionary or that struggling family that God's put on my heart. Even if I don't have everything I need, I know that God owns it all. He can provide. I can love that person in my family, even when they don't deserve it. Even if they're so hard to love, I can love them because my God is love. This morning, what ridiculous impossible is in your way? What battle are you facing that you don't have the resources to win? What miracle does God want to do in your life? But it's going to take a step of faith. It's going to take that faith of Jonathan to see that miracle happen. Several years ago when I was in West Virginia, I was pastoring the church in West Virginia, and one of these situations was facing me. I was in West Virginia, and I knew God after praying. We were trying to find a ministry that we could just really reach into the community. And we began praying, and God laid it on my heart. He actually dropped it on my lap. There's this ministry called Celebrate Recovery. And the addiction and the drugs in where we were in West Virginia, in Weirton, West Virginia, were off the charts. I mean, it was one of the worst places in West Virginia. Actually, I think it was the worst place in West Virginia. And God said, we need to reach them. We need to start a recovery program. So I went to check out this ministry, and I went to this training, and I got done, and I said, God, there is no way I can do that. Because if there is anybody in this world that should not be able to minister to someone in recovery, it's me. Because I have no experience, absolutely zero experience with that. And God said, no, I want you to start that ministry of recovery. And I'm like, God, that's impossible. That is impossible. In fact, it was ridiculously impossible. I said, God, you're going to have to choose. There's got to be someone else. It was one of those moments where it was like I saw the problem. And I saw me. And I saw my resources. And I knew it couldn't be done. But God said, you know what? Actually, he kind of kicked me. He said, you better take out a step in faith. And I could walk you through miracle after miracle after miracle on how God began Celebrate Recovery in Weirton, West Virginia. How we began this ministry that there was no way it was going to happen. But God specializes in the impossible. God specializes in miracles. So we begin to close. I'm going to ask our worship team to come forward. You know, I think of today, I think of now, I think of all the times where the army was too big in my life. Where the impossible was too big, but God is always bigger. And when we step out in faith, God always provides. In fact, right now, I look out and the impossible that's actually facing me right now, I'm going to get a little real, just to let you know, is the ministry of LifeWise. You know, when we came here, one of the first things that God laid on our heart was if we could get the word into the schools, if we could just minister to those children in our school, it would just be amazing. And you know what? I am scared to death, if I'm being honest with you, I am scared to death of that ministry, trying to get that ministry going, because what if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't get going? What if the school board says no? What if, there is just so many what ifs. But God is bigger than the what ifs. God is bigger than the battle facing us. So it's one of those moments where we just take a step in faith and say, God, trust in you. I don't know what impossible is in your life, but whatever it is, God is saying, I want you to take that step like Jonathan did. I want you to take that step, and it doesn't matter what the weapons look like, it doesn't matter what the numbers look like, because nothing can hinder the Lord. That kind of faith and that kind of boldness, that's what I want in my life. That kind of faith and that kind of boldness is what changes communities, changes the world. Let's stand this morning, and as we worship Him, let's have faith like Jonathan.